It's important to remember that in life, without the ability to laugh, well, we don't have much left. And it's thrilling and wonderful and just a lot of fun to welcome David Misch, who has worked in showbiz for a few years. He's written and produced pilots for all the major networks and was executive producer of a show that I actually loved called Duckman, which won a couple of big awards. And he's taught musical satire at UCLA and the principles of comedy at USC. How do you get a gig like that? David Misch joins us now, the author of Funny, the book Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Comedy. I didn't say, but we're afraid to ask. Hello there, David.
Hi there.
How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you.
We need you tonight. Thank you very much. We just need to take a break here, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, in the book I talk about Sigmund Freud's saying that humor is absolutely critical for people as a coping mechanism, and it's at times like this that we ultimately fall back on that. Not right away, of course, but there are lots of instances of humor helping to get people past difficult times.
Let's not give the impression that this is an academic exercise only. I mean, you have great fun with this. I loved it. I laughed, I cried. No, I really did. And we'll talk a little about the history of it. It's really cool. I have some clips to play, just a few that I dug up. But really, when you think about it, the history of comedy as it is, performed comedy, man, it goes back a long way. You have cavemen drawing funny pictures on walls, don't you?
Well, I do. I don't think that's actually documented. Once in a while I have a little bit of fun with the actual history of comedy, but it does go back quite a long ways. The oldest recorded joke, let me see if I remember, I think it goes back to, 1900 B.C., and a civilization called the Sumerians, and the joke goes as follows. Something which has never occurred since time began, a young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. So, yes, the oldest recorded joke is a fart joke.
Well, that happens to be still what any kid in a bus will tell you is still the funniest thing in the world. And quite frankly,
there are a few grown-ups in buses who find it funny as well.
Yeah, it really is. And you go into great detail about flatulation, which we'll talk about perhaps a little bit later on. But really, it's a look at the history of humor, of wit, and there are so many sort of avenues to take. Was this a project? Obviously, you teach this stuff and you have a lot of fun with it, but you could have written 5 volumes, I think, right, with all this?
Yeah, I think I probably couldn't have sold 5 volumes if I squeezed it all into one. But, it's, so just skimming along the highlights of it, it's too vast a subject to cover in the 200 pages I have. So, as I say in the book, I had to make it half vast. But in any case, the subject of comedy is so wide. I talk about history, anthropology, biology, neurology, and obviously I go into the people who've done it, Richard Pryor, Steve Martin, the Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, and it's all fascinating to me. So I could have gone on at even greater length.
I guess you're in the show business world, and you've produced a lot of television, and I guess it's sort of easy to say it all got started when we were able to watch these guys on a screen, or go to a big amphitheater that was mic'd and we could actually hear them. But comedy and humor, I mean, Shakespeare, and well before that, even before the masses, right? I mean, there were court jesters, there were tricksters, as you say.
Yeah, well, Court Jester was essentially the first stand-up comic, and the jesters had a command performance situation where they had a small audience, the king and his court. But that was the basic principles of making people laugh in a structured setting came from that. But going back even further, the character of Trickster, it's not an actual person. It's a mythological figure that occurs, and this is, to me, the very fascinating part. It occurs in every civilization ever charted by anthropologists or historians. Every civilization has a character who's the button pusher, the troublemaker, someone who's devoting his life to turning things upside down, to challenging everyone's assumptions, to making them laugh, either through some sort of wordplay, puns, double entendres, oxymorons, or with fart jokes. Tricksters have a huge history of dealing with body functions.
Yeah, well,
like that.
The unexpected, right?
Absolutely.
What makes comedy work for me is always, that I didn't see that one coming. It's always an allusion to something that's serious. Might be the funniest thing of all. Yep.
Yeah, a surprise is absolutely critical to comedy. If you think about it for a second, it makes sense. I mean, if you know what's coming, it's not going to be funny for the most part. There are some exceptions to that. But in the book, I say that peekaboo is everyone's first comedy routine. And, it's like, where'd Mommy go? Oh, my gosh, she's right there. She was there the whole time. And when your brain puts those things together in a rapid way, that's where humor comes from.
Talking with David Misch, M-I-S-C-H. What is Funny? Funny is the book by David. Everything you always wanted to know about comedy. It's really cool. A lot of great insight into history and the world, and also the modern comics and who does it well. And you, of course, mentioned right off the bat the Marx Brothers. And I remember seeing a double bill of Day at the Races, Night at the Opera, and when I was about 8, and thinking, okay, this is about as funny as it gets. To me, that was the Nirvana at 8 years old. I still haven't really found anything that can top it, although I've found many that come close and match it. Why the Marx Brothers? Why did you devote a chapter to them?
Well, before going into that, let me track back just to confirm what you said. That was actually my moment. My epiphany was I was a little older. I was like 22 or 3, and I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Marx Brothers were just being rediscovered. They had kind of been forgotten for 20 years after they stopped making movies. Groucho had a TV series that was pretty successful, but the movies really had been just gathering dust. And I went to a double feature of Night at the Opera and Duck Soup. And it was like when I saw the Beatles on screen for the first time. The audience was laughing so hard you couldn't hear the dialogue. It was just a theater levitating with sound and guffaws. And I thought, I want to be part of that.
Oh, yeah.
So the Marx Brothers are fascinating because even though they couldn't have been less pretentious, they actually embody many of the elements of trickster Groucho with his incredible wordplay and language and his fast talking. Groucho is generally considered the funniest comic of all time, at least by other comics. And Harpo with his pantomime and his obsession with base animal instincts, and Chico, who also played with words and was kind of sly in all sorts of ways. So they sort of embody all the different elements of comedy in one group. But one of the things I go into in the discussion of the Marx Brothers is, really the whole thesis of this book is that comedy doesn't get respect. Drama gets all the respect. Comedy is just a great thing we enjoy on the side, but you don't take it seriously. And I think it's time to take comedy seriously.
Good.
And as an example, the Marx Brothers took it seriously. And one reason their movies are so funny is that they took all the comedy routines from their movies, at least the early ones, on the road. They would actually perform the comedy bits from their movies, their upcoming movies, in theaters, the last remaining vaudeville houses. And they had a guy in the audience with a chart, and he would mark the number of laughs and the amount of time for each laugh, for each bit. And they cut out the things that didn't get laughs and just amplify the ones that did, and that's why they work on screen.
Indeed. And by the way, note to the audience, it is Chico, not Chico. If anybody says Chico Marx on this show, you're off the show. Thank you very much. I just had to say that because I like you.
You know where that comes from. It's because he liked the chicks.
He liked the chicks, exactly. It's nothing to do with the Italian thing. It's the Chico thing. My guest is David Misch. If you'd like to join us this hour, it's a wonderful escape. We're talking about his wonderful book called Funny, the book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy. And we've got a lot to talk about. 617-254-1030 or 888-929-1030. And I've made my career goal has been to emulate some of the great comics and try to be funny once in a great while. And we're going to get into some of this, but you focus on the great monologists, and that would include people like Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, and they lead ultimately, don't they, to the monologists and the stand-up guys, in a sense, the storytellers of today.
Yeah, well, they were the first ones doing it in America, which was, after all, a primitive new land in the 17 and 1800s. And Mark Twain, who became very popular with his books, Huckleberry Finn is considered the great American novel by many people. He would travel across the country doing lectures, which the actor Hal Holbrook later recreated in a very successful show, Mark Twain Tonight, that ran for 20 or 30 years.
Still doing it, by the way. He's 87. He's still doing it.
He's still doing it. You're right. I did read that. It's just incredible. But Oscar Wilde came over from England, and he was a rare flower. He was, this incredible dandy, and it was something America had never seen before. But he was also, outrageously witty, and he would travel across the country getting great acclaim and drawing huge crowds. And that really, I think, helped inspire the taste for people doing what eventually became stand-up comedy.
And you got people like Bob Hope who elevated it. I mean, granted, Bob Hope had an amazing career, but he was one who did it on radio, television, and overseas. And then others, of course, who have taken over the mantle. And I am probably like you, a huge Carlin fan. I mean, to me, George Carlin was the great philosopher of our age, and so many others. We mentioned Richard Pryor. We'll get into some of these. Now, what also makes the book so much fun is, of course, you're throwing in a lot of gags here and there, but you're looking at the evolution of humor and how it all sort of changes down through the decades and down through the centuries. And you can look at people like Woody Allen, for instance, who comes along in the 60s, well, actually the 50s. He changes the way stand-up is done in a big way, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's tricky. Among the other challenges of trying to make a book of relatively short length is who you choose and who you leave out. I was doing a talk at a place the other day, and I got a question afterwards. The woman said, "How come there's nothing about ventriloquism?" And, I said, look, I gave Bob Hope a paragraph. I'm not going to have room for ventriloquism.
Charlie McCarthy will find his own book. I mean, don't worry.
Exactly. But, in Volume 8 of Funny the Sequel, then maybe I'll get to it. But in any case, so I had to choose, and so I chose 3 comics who I felt weren't just the best or weren't necessarily my favorites, but the ones who changed the face of comedy. Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, and Woody Allen. And Woody Allen changed it because there had never, I think, on anywhere in the world been a guy who brought this sort of patina, this possibly facade of intellectualism to comedy. His jokes were so smart, you had to think about them, and it was like a compliment to your own brain when you got them. But he was still very accessible because he adopted this persona of the nerd, the schlub, because he was, in fact, short and wore glasses and he was skinny. But it was just, to a large degree, it was fake. I mean, it was really a persona because he was very successful with women. He was, very smart. He never had severe problems in that regard, but he played that character and played it brilliantly. And his whole method of doing humor was so different from any of the comics who, do these one-liners that he changed everything.
The moose bit is one of my favorite bits. You know
Absolutely.
The moose. It's a giant
and,
moose.
His distinctive delivery.
I know.
Sort of, I shot a moose once. He over-enunciates everything.
So I show up and I'm with the moose, Yeah. Anyway, David, hold on. When we come back, we'll take some phone calls. And we'd just like to hear from you guys out there, anybody, on what's funny and who's funny and who makes you laugh. And it could be a movie reference or whatever. I mean, if you're reading Chaucer at the moment and you think that's a scream. David Misch, M-I-S-C-H, great talent. His book, Funny the Book. And we'll continue in a moment here on The Jordan Rich Show.
Igor, may I speak to you for a moment?
Of course.
Sit down, won't you?
Thank you.
No, up here.
Oh, thank you.
Now, that brain that you gave me, was it Hans Delbrück's?
No.
Good. Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in?
And you won't be angry?
I will not be angry.
Abby someone.
Abby someone. Abby who?
Abby Normal.
Abby Normal.
I'm almost sure that was the name.
Are you saying that I put an abnormal brain into a 7.5-foot long, 54-inch wide gorilla? Is that what you're telling me? Quick, get it up.
Wat? Vlees in de bus, yes.
I can't help myself. And every time I hear Hans Delbruck, I crack up. That was Young Frankenstein. Just one of a few.
I believe it's Young Frankenstein.
Oh, the Frankenstein, yes. It's interesting. I'm talking with David Misch. The book is called Funny, and it's a history of comedy, and it's great stuff. And you know what's interesting about that movie? Everything is great about that movie, but they do really pay homage, if you will, to Laurel and Hardy, to the old chap. I mean, everything is a Mel Brooks homage to the old days, the Marx Brothers, everything, right? It's
Absolutely.
So cool.
And one of the things I mentioned in the book is that I deal with a lot of classic comedy and some contemporary. I talk about Steve Carell in The Office and some other Sarah Silverman, Amy Schumer. But a lot of it is the older comedy, and I try to illustrate why with a joke. A guy reads Hamlet for the first time, and a friend asks him, how'd you like it? And he said, it's nothing but a bunch of quotations. And the fact is, once you know what the classic comedy is, what the traditions of comedy are, then every movie you see is nothing but quotations from the masters.
The comics whom I know, and I know a lot of them from local areas here in Boston, there's some great ones. Most of the guys who are really good at what they do, and I'm just saying guys and gals, are the ones who, like ball players who know about history of baseball, they know and understand. So young guys who are very hip will say, oh my God, pick anybody, Shecky Green, there's a master, or Milton Berle. I think that's the cool thing about the comedians who really get it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think, when you're very young, it may not always be the case, although a lot of comics are like you and me. They got inspired by seeing or hearing, a great comedian perform. But the more you get into it, the more you realize how difficult it is, what an art it is, what a difficult thing it is to do, and you begin to study what it was that made it. And that's where this book came from. I was just fascinated by the mechanics of comedy. And there's an old saying that if you examine comedy, you kill it. And my answer is always, well, just tell the joke first, and then examine it. You'll get your laugh, but then you can figure out why. And if, in fact, examining things we loved killed them, why would anyone study, classical music or art or anything? I mean, I think comedy's no different. It rewards study and enhances your enjoyment of it.
But it's so true that the oldest joke about jokes is timing, and it's so true, isn't it, David, that among all the great moments in comedy, so much of it has to do with how it's brought through time-wise. It's very musical. Even
oh, absolutely.
Many
comedians have also been musicians. All three Marx Brothers were musicians, of course.
Right. And you look at the patter that Abbott and Costello were so brilliant for, not just Who's on First, so many of their bits, and others down through. Now, we've got a full bank of lines, so I'm going to get the callers on right after the bottom of our break. We'll allow them to spout, and what they want to spout about, I don't know. But I love your book because it's really so much more than just the peripheral stuff that we've been mentioning. You even talk about things like On Stage, Harvey and 1,000 Clowns, two brilliant plays. Maybe a little dated now, but proven.
Well, Harvey's a hit on Broadway with Jim Parsons, The Big Bang Theory.
It's actually back, and
now it's a huge hit.
So I take that back. And 1,000 Clowns, Jason Robards, who was not known as a comedic actor, and yet he pulled it off. And I was thinking about Neil Simon. Oh my God, everything he did was brilliant, and it still makes you laugh. As we go along. So stand by one sec, okay, Dave?
Sure thing.
And we'll come back. David Misch is his name. The website is davidmisch, MISCH.com. When we come back, we'll get to Gary, Glenn, Tom, and Steve, and others at 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030. And, of course, we will have some open line time later. We will also have other guests joining us and an update on what's going on in the world. The world is a crazy, nutty, rather difficult place to live in. If we didn't have humor, if we didn't laugh, oh my gosh, what would the world be like? It'd be like a world without music. So when we come back with David, we'll focus on some of these other great comics and where it all comes from, and we'll realize that we really do have a lot going for us. This is WBZ and WCCO CBS Radio Late Night with me, Jordan, on the weekends. Visit jordanrich.com, and you can also link up to our new Facebook fan page.
In baseball, the team is run by a manager, and only in baseball does the manager or the coach have to wear the same uniform the players do. Can you picture Bill Parcells in his New York Giants uniform? Now, baseball and football are different from one another in other kind of interesting ways, I think. First of all, Baseball is a 19th century pastoral game. Football is a 20th century technological struggle. Baseball is played on a diamond, in a park, the baseball park. Football is played on a gridiron in a stadium, sometimes called Soldier Field or War Memorial Stadium. Baseball begins in the spring, the season of new life. Football begins in the fall when everything is dying. In football, you wear a helmet. In baseball, you wear a cap.
Welcome back. Jordan Rich here, and we're celebrating and taking a break from the news of the day with humor. The book by David Misch is what is the focus. Funny, the book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy. That was Carlin, of course, and a great moment about sports. And David, we're going to go to some calls if you're all set.
I am set.
Okay, sir. We're starting with, let's see, Tom in the car phone first. Tom, welcome to the program. You're on with David Misch and me. How are you?
Hey, Jordan, Dave, how are you?
Great.
Just fine.
Hey, I just wanted to call up and just give you my take on, a few comedians that I find extremely funny. I mean, I love the self-deprecating humor of, Woody Allen, but there's some older comedians that I still think, translate to today. Lenny Bruce and Bob Newhart, absolutely love the stuff that they've done. Along with a couple of, ones that may not be on the beaten path, Buddy Hackett and Bill Dana. I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Dana, but he had a routine. Right. He was Jose Jimenez.
Yep.
And my mother had that record album when I was a kid, and I thought it was the funniest thing in the world.
It's from Quincy, Mass. Yeah. Hang on a second there, Tommy, because you mentioned Lenny Bruce, and it's important in terms of the history of comedy to look at Lenny Bruce and actually Bob Newhart, because Newhart was the number one seller back then. But what about Lenny Bruce's contribution, Dave?
Yeah, before doing that, let me just go back to Bill Dana, which many people don't know. He was a comedy writer. He produced and wrote for many of the top sitcoms, and Jose Jimenez was a character he did at parties, and he ended up making a record. His friends urged him to make a record, and he became a huge comedian because of it, but he was just a writer moonlighting. But as I mentioned in the book, basically you can divide the history of stand-up comedy between before Lenny and after Lenny. He was, a gigantic influence, most obviously on Carlin, but pretty much everyone, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, everyone who attempted to break any kind of social taboos owed it to Lenny, not just in terms of inspiration, but in terms of what he suffered for his art. Right. Essentially, that and drugs killed him. But he was, just fearless in what he would talk about, and fearless in his truth-telling, which was really more important than the obvious things of sex and drugs and obscenity. Right. He was really getting to the core of human relations and the way and society, and that was, I think, what was most frightening about him to the people of the time.
Tom, great observations. Anything else?
Yeah, and what I find interesting about a comedian like Buddy Hackett was most people will remember him for, roles in the Frankie and Annette movies, but in reality, he was very blue when he performed on stage.
Yes.
And if you've ever heard some of his material, it blows your mind that it's the same person.
Indeed.
A lot of people know him from The Music Man, too, the movie, and that was really what he did in a lot of movies, was this kind of cutesy pie character, which he did very effectively. But on stage, as you say, he was as dirty as they come.
Herbie the Love Bug, too, right?
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it, man.
Jordan, can I just throw out two other comedians out there that are newer?
Why not?
Well, not really new. I mean, back in the 80s, Stephen Wright I thought was hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
His one-liners. And, you mentioned ventriloquist, and I don't know if you've ever seen any Jeff Dunham, but I think he's absolutely hilarious.
We've had him on the show.
I saw his one-man show, I think it was 2 years ago, and then he brought it to Broadway and was pretty successful.
Yeah, he's a nice guy, too. We've had him on a couple of years ago, but a great talent. Tom, thank you so much. Appreciate it, man.
Have a good night.
Be well. Yeah, we'll get to some...
Jordan, can I break in 1 second?
Of course.
I don't know if you're aware of my history with Boston.
Please, you mentioned Cambridge
earlier. I
lived there
for a few years, and in the year 1976, Boston Magazine named me best comedian in Boston. And, I'm very proud of this. It was a really difficult struggle to get to that position. The only slight drawback to that august title that I earned is that at the time I was literally the only comedian in Boston.
Where were you working back then?
Other comedians. In 1977, a kid named Jay Leno moved in, and I was no longer number one.
What clubs were available to you? Where were you working?
There were no comedy clubs then. I played at folk clubs
Oh,
like Passim, which was the old Club 47 in Harvard Square, and a place called... oh my God, what was it called? I'm suddenly spacing
Not the
on
Ding Ho. That wasn't.
It was on Beacon Hill, I think.
Oh, we've got a ton of calls here, so let's continue. 617
Jordan, can I throw in one other thing?
Sure.
He mentioned my website, but I'd like to not neglect the book's website. It's funnythebook.com. And the reason I mention it, aside from sheer shameless self-promotion, is that it's got a lot of comedy clips on it. So you can go and you can, without buying the book, you can steal all the best things from it, which is classic comedy through the years.
And by the way, before we get to the question, Police Squad. You worked on Police Squad?
Yeah, I did.
My God, is that a great show? I mean, one of those shows, it only lasted, about 8 episodes or something?
6 episodes, and only 4 were shown in its original run. But its legend lives on.
It was and is a great show. All right, I'm going to ask the question. Can you stay a little longer after the top of the hour if we want to keep you over? Okay, because I think we need to hold this over. We all need this tonight, dear friend. But I wanted to present you with the J question. Let's go for it. Why are Jews funny?
Oh.
And I'm one of them, so I think I know, but you explore this.
Well, Larry Gelbart, a very famous comedy writer, he wrote a bunch of funny movies, but he's probably best known for doing the TV series MASH.
Right.
And he was asked in the 50s, how come there are so many comedy writers who are young and Jewish? And he said, well, I think the reason is because so many of our parents were old and Jewish. And but that begs the question, and I devote a whole chapter to it in Funny the Book, which is, why are Jews funny? And I think there actually are some answers. One is Jewish tradition, which sort of reveres the word. The examination of Torah text is a key part of Judaism, and the examination of words is a key part of comedy. George Carlin, ended up making his whole career out of it, and it's in bits and pieces in almost every form of comedy.
Right.
But then the other thing is that, and it relates to the horrible things in Colorado right now, which is that Jewish history is tragic. And basically, the best way to get through tragedy is with trying to go on, to lighten up your spirits, to realize there are things to live for, and one of the greatest things to live for is laughter. So I think Jews have cultivated a sense of humor in the face of overwhelming tragedy to help them survive.
It's no question that in the laughter, behind the laughter, that old expression, are the tears. You worked with Robin Williams on Mork and Mindy, obviously. There's a case of a guy at the time, if memory serves, he was just a firestorm, amazing energy, and yet beset by drugs and stuff. I mean, and there are so many cases. Look at Belushi, look at John. I mean, so many. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Incredible.
It's hard. It's always hard to say what the relationship is because there are people who take drugs in all sorts of situations. But I think it's less to do with comedy than fame. I think Robin probably indulged a bit before he got famous, but he indulged a lot more after he got famous.
Yeah. Let's take a break and come back. And you can stay a little bit longer after the top of the hour. Great. I'd love to have you. David Misch is his name. Certainly a great career in comedy as a writer, as a performer, a producer on television, and now the author of a really terrific book called Funny, the Book, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Comedy. We'll continue in just a memento. Don't go away. This is the Jordan Rich Show. WBZ, WCCO, 617-254-1030 or 888-929-1030. And in case you're just tuning in, we are taking a break from the hard news, thank goodness. We're doing so with the help of David Misch and his wonderful book, Funny, the Book, Everything You Always Want to Know About Comedy. Go to funnythebook.com. And we've asked David to stick around for the next hour as well because there's so much to cover here. And so guys who are on the phone, stand by. Bob, we'll get to you. Glenn, One-Eye Jack, and all the other characters who want to check in with us. In terms of, I'm a big punster. I love puns. There's a wonderful one on page 125. Maybe you can read that one. But the people always say, groan. And yet to me, and Richard Lederer, a dear friend of mine, would agree, it's one of the truest senses of wit. Is it not, my friend?
It is, my friend.
Good.
No, I totally agree. It's so weird because everyone groans, and yet even the people who groan tend to make them. They're just irresistible. And it gets sort of back to Trickster because the idea of playing with language, it's one of the most fun humans can have. little kids, when they first discover the double meanings of words, go nuts with them. And it's really one of the ways in which comedy actually is a form of brain power. The playwright Tom Stoppard calls laughter the sound of comprehension. Anytime you hear a joke, anytime you hear a pun, it involves your brain putting together these two different ideas and then coming up with the solution, the answer, and that's what comedy is. And it really is, that's why why puns are a key form of wit. And much as we put them down, we still love them. And, of course, we always point out that Shakespeare had hundreds, and who can get classier than that?
You leave no stone unturned here. There's a chapter called Love and Theft. Carlos Mencia, look out. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, plagiarism and the fact that a good joke, I mean, I repeat jokes, but I usually give credit. Milton Berle was the famous one for stealing everything, but
he was called the thief of bad gags.
The thief of bad gags. But down through history, right? There have been a lot of examples of this. You point out a few interesting ones here.
Yeah, well, I mean, aside from stealing jokes, I mean, plagiarism is not only rife in the world of art, but it's sort of inevitable. I mean, you can't, what I say in the book is that, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. The problem comes when the giant says, get the hell off my shoulders. So it's well and good and absolutely imperative to take what other people have done. It's used in sampling, in rap. It's used in classical music. Handel stole from Telemann. Shakespeare stole all of his plots but one from previously written plays. The key, though, is not stealing. It's transforming. It's putting your own personality onto what you've taken.
Exactly. And I mentioned Carlos Mencia. The reason I did was because he's been ratted out by other comics for being a joke stealer, and that's the kind of thing that comics don't take too kindly to. And that can happen. No.
And there are comics out there who other comics will not perform if the bad comic is in the room.
Exactly. Now, when we come back, we're going to look at some other issues here. We're going to look at it, some more fun. We've got a complete lineup of callers who can't wait to talk to you. And, of course, you cover it all from Buster Keaton, who I believe is underappreciated. I think you do, too. And we'll take a look, of course, at Lucy and some of the plays and some of the other things that are really part of this. And maybe we can also look at regions of the country or parts of the world that may be funnier than others. I mean, there's no question that New York is funny, Boston can be funny, Arlington, Cambridge, not funny. I don't know.
Well, I used to live in Cambridge, so I deeply resent that.
Well, when you left, it was not funny. That's what happened. By the way, what theater did you go to see the Marx Brothers? Was it the Orson Welles or was it?
It was the Orson Welles. Absolutely.
I remember mine was, the Emerson. It was on. It's long gone. It's now a Fridays or something. But seeing a movie like that with people who were, and here we are talking about movies in this horrible weekend, but it was a joyous occasion, wasn't it?
A full house full of laughing people. Yeah. You can watch a sitcom at home, and it's great. I do it all the time. I couldn't enjoy myself more. But when you're in a theater with hundreds of people and it's on the big screen, oh, man, that's bliss.
Absolutely. You give me the Inspector Clouseau, the original, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm a happy guy.
I say in the book that the Shot in the Dark is really one of the top comic performances of all time, Peter Sellers.
So stand by, dear friends. We'll put you on hold there, David. Don't go away. David Misch is on the line with David Misch and Jordan Rich. By Jove, we've got something there. All right, a comedy tonight. We'll be back with much more straight ahead.
Something familiar, something peculiar, something for everybody. Comedy tonight. Something that's bawdy, something that's bawdy. Something for everybody. Comedy tonight. Nothing that's grim. Nothing that's Greek. She plays Medea later this week. Stunning surprises, cunning disguises. Hundreds of actors out of sight. Buttons and tunics, courtesans and eunuchs.
WBZ and HD, WBZ FM HD3 Boston.
Slanderers, cupidity, timidity, mistakes, fakes, lies, tumblers, mumblers, fumblers, wumblers, no royal curse, no Trojan horse. There's a happy ending, of course. Goodness and badness, man in his madness. This time it alters our
I am prepared to make a statement. When I was a lad, I was gloomy and sad as I was from the day I was born. When other babes giggled and gurgled and wiggled, I proudly was loudly forlorn. My friends and my family looked at me clammily, thought there was something amiss. When others found various antics hilarious, all I could manage was this. Or this, or this, or this. My father, he shouted, he needs to be clouded, his teeth on a wreath, I'll hand him. My mother, she cried as she rushed to my side, you're a brute and you don't understand him. So they sent for a witch with a terrible twitch to ask how my future impressed her. She took one look at me and cried, he. What else could he be but a jester? A jester? A jester? A funny idea, a jester. No butcher, no baker, no candlestick maker, and me with the look of a fine undertaker impressed her? As a jester?
Hey, welcome back. It is the Jordan Rich Show. We continue here midway through the program. It's 59 degrees where we are, WBZ and WCCO. Why that song by the great Danny Kaye from the Court Jester? Well, we are continuing. We're holding him over because he's so good. David Misch is the author of Funny, the book. Everything you always wanted to know about comedy. I went to the website and lifted that wonderful cut off of funnythebook.com, David, because like you, there's so much talent in Danny Kaye, we can't even begin to measure it. But that song sort of sums up the ancient days of comedy, doesn't it?
It does, and may I just put in a pitch for that movie? The Court Jester is, at the time, I think it was 1957, was the most expensive comedy ever made, but it's still one of the greatest ones, and people don't, I think, really know about it now, and I got a daughter, she's 22, so long ago she gave up watching the movies I said were funny. She loved Marx Brothers when she was young, but then she got older and it had to be contemporary. But Court Jester still does it for her. I mean, that's just a great movie, beginning to end.
It's one of two movies I've ordered on Amazon over the years when they were still making videotapes. One was that, and the other one was a comedy called All Through the Night with Humphrey Bogart, 1943. It's one of my favorite.
Oh, too, I think.
Yeah, it's just, and Gleason's in it. It's just one of those
that's right.
Great movies. So anyway, we're going to get right back to the calls because you guys have been so patient. We'll start with one of our regulars. This is Glenn from Brighton, Mass. Glenn, welcome. You've been waiting a long time.
Oh, thank you very much. And I wanted to tell your guest I'm a blind piano tuner, and I find comedy is a coping device for me.
Yeah.
It's that's how I cope. I don't think I could get through life without comedy.
Well, you're not alone, yeah.
Yeah. Presently, my favorite, he's not known per se as a comedian, but he just cracks me up. My favorite sitcom, The Big Bang Theory, this guy, Dr. Sheldon Cooper. I don't know who the actor is that plays him. I wish he'd be a great guest, but...
well, that's the main actor, right?
Yes. I think that's Jim Parsons,
Jim
who
Parsons.
I mentioned is starring on Broadway right now, and he's gotten just rapturous reviews. You know, Harvey was a play that Jimmy Stewart starred in, and so it's a heck of shoes to fill, but they say Parsons as great as Stewart in his own way.
Well, let me ask David a question, and posing this question is directly, bouncing off of Glenn's point, and that is humor. There's so many types of it. There's the broad-based, flat slapstick and all that, but the kind of humor that the Big Bang Theory elevates us to, and also, say, Frasier, even Newhart, was an intelligent, bright, effervescent kind of humor where you had to be pretty culturally hip and also somewhat academically hip. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Let me go to Frasier for a second, because that was one of the few sitcoms ever, really, which didn't pander to its audience in any way. I mean, even something as brilliant as Seinfeld didn't really do things that would go past huge sections of the audience. But for Frasier, there were references in every episode that you had to have been somewhat well read to even get. And of course, it covered its tracks by making fun of the cultural awareness and intellectualism of its characters, but it still required that of its audience. One thing Glenn was talking about in terms of how much he loved Big Bang Theory made me think about the history of the sitcom, because situation comedies, which began actually in the late 40s, but the big breakthrough was I Love Lucy in the early 50s, But the relationship we have to them is so different from movies and stand-ups because it's this intimacy of watching it at home. It's really like someone in our living room entertaining us, and so we draw this connection with the characters that we don't have with them with the comedians as much on stage or on the screen, on the big screen.
Bob in the North End is on the line with David Misch, the author of a great new book called Funny, the Book. Hi there, Bob.
Hello, Jordan. Hello, David.
Hi, Bob. Welcome.
I'm looking forward to reading the book. I'm very interested in comedy. I love all types of comedy, but I was recently came across the PBS did a documentary on comedy, and I found that very amusing and entertaining.
Yeah, Billy Crystal hosted that.
Wasn't it a variety of comedians, though? They were doing interviews, if I remember correctly? It's the same one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, they had interviews with a lot of comics and some great clips, which I was envious of because when I was researching the book and putting things on my website, I was looking everywhere for clips, and it's hard to find the great ones.
Yeah, you talk about the great ones. I mean, I like some of the older comedians more myself. I think someone had mentioned Buddy Hackett, like the old headliners in Vegas, and Don Rickles. I mean, those are the people that I sort of find more entertaining myself. Jackie Gleason as well, and the Honeymooners. I mean, you don't get any funnier than that.
Let me ask all of you, both of you, Don Rickles, who I think is hysterical. I can just look at him and I fall apart. Don Rickles is 86 years old or so, still on the road, and that was
there was a documentary.
Yes, wasn't that great? And I just wanted to ask you your opinion, David, and then I'll talk to you, Bob. Rickles has done his thing now for decades, and if people don't know yet by now that Rickles is Rickles, now just a few weeks ago, he made that crack about Obama and got into some trouble with the Hollywood crowd. You remember that?
I remember very well, and I was asked about it, and let me tie it to something even more recent, if we can just take a second. There's a young comic named Daniel Tosh, and last week he did a joke about rape in a nightclub, and a woman from the audience yelled out, "There's nothing funny about rape." And according to some eyewitnesses, he then said, "Wouldn't it be funny if that woman got raped right now?" Now, people are outraged by that, and people were outraged by what Rickles said. But what you said, I mean, we know what Rickles does. The people who came to see Daniel Tosh know what he does. But even more important, that's what comedians do. Now, comedians are not always right. They say stupid, offensive things.
Right.
But no comic worth his or her salt is going to be able to come up with brilliant things unless they try everything. And they try things, they fail, and then they try again. Now, there's no reason you shouldn't be offended. Be offended.
Yes.
But there have been people saying you should take Daniel Tosh off Comedy Central where he has a show and things. I don't think censorship is the answer. And, in fact, I think the answer is other people doing things that are smarter and funnier. Right. And the satirical newspaper The Onion the next day had a headline, "Daniel Tosh chuckles through own violent rape." That, to me, is how you deal with offensive speech.
Carlin did a piece on rape, and I know it sounds raw to say this, that is absolutely brilliant, and only you have to hear it. I can't play it on the air, but
I've not heard that.
Oh my goodness, it's about I'm saying about 84 or 87 in that range, and you think to yourself, how can he ever make something funny out of this? Believe me, but it's the absurdity of it. That's what makes it funny. Bob, coming back to you, I'm sorry, my friend. You mentioned some of the old timers, and I couldn't agree more. What about comedians, Bob? I know they don't call them that anymore.
Actually, I'm not to comedians. It's funny you brought up female comedians or comedians, if you want to call them that. I don't know if I'm abnormal, to go in that direction, but I find it very difficult to find one that a comedian that makes me laugh. I don't know why, but I've just never even. Everybody talks about the old ones like Lucy Ball. I enjoy the shows, the stories in Lucy's show, but just the comedy of women. For some reason, I just don't.
Well,
is that
David,
abnormal?
No, David, I'd love you to chime in on this because I know you talk about the women, and there are some very funny women. But what is he saying? Is it something that we're so culturally used to have a guy make fun of himself or us? Tell him what you think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it has a lot to do with our culture and when the eras we grew up in. I think for many years it was very difficult for women to get a fair hearing because women were simply not expected to do that. But then the next question becomes, why were women not expected to do that? And I think it has to do with some of the key components of comedy. One is aggression. Some people believe that comedy is inherently aggressive. It's always making fun of people. One of the old theories of comedy is called the superiority theory. A philosopher named Thomas Hobbes came up with it, and that says that all comedy comes from our feeling superior to someone else. Now, I don't think that's exactly true, but there's an element of truth in it, and I think a woman being up there, holding herself above other people, being not physically aggressive, but verbally aggressive, is something that society wasn't used to. And in the 50s and 60s, the early female comics like Phyllis Diller were, as I mentioned in the book, self-misogynistic. They put down their own looks as a way of disarming the audience. On the other hand, there was Moms Mabley in the 40s who performed with Red Fox and was at least as dirty as he was.
Yes.
But I think her crowds, again, expected it. And let me go back to one other thing. You were talking about being offended, how Rickles and Tosh offend people. And the other tricky thing about censorship is how people are offended by different things. The president of the satirical newspaper The Onion a few years ago said he always gets letters about how they love that joke you did about the person who was killed in the car crash, but then you did a joke about someone who has cancer, and my sister has cancer. That's not funny. And basically, everyone has their own venue from which to view humor, and there are certain buttons you're going to push that are going to tick off some people.
And it is a dangerous, very dangerous slope when people want to excise jokes from a comedy club where you're paying money. It's not broadcast. It's a personal adventure into this realm. And again, even HBO. I mean, listen, you still have to pay for it. It's still something you have to order, and I think it's very unhealthy. Let's put it that way. To eradicate certain comics or jokes because you don't find them tasteful enough.
The best way to eradicate it is the off button.
Exactly.
And if you're in a club, the best way to eradicate it is to get up and leave.
Or get your money back.
The best comment on the different perspectives we see comedy from was Mel Brooks, who said, comedy is you falling into an open manhole. Tragedy is when I get a hangnail.
And it's the old schlemiel schlemuzzle joke. You know, you're a schlemiel if you spill the soup. You're the schlemuzzle if they spill it on you. If you're the guy that spilled it. All right, Bob, in the North End.
If I could bring up just one more. You
yes.
mentioned Mel Brooks. You talked about wit earlier, and that's another thing I find I'm fascinated with is wit. Like, take Johnny Carson show, for instance, when, say, someone like Albert Brooks, to mention another Brooks, and Johnny Carson, just the banter back and forth. And when someone it just was unrehearsed comedy, when they would just conversate, and someone would just say something so witty, and it would just really make you laugh. I mean, we talk about wit, and that type of stuff I always found amusing, too, on the Johnny Carson show. When two people, would just talk, and someone just said something off the cuff. And I had so many belly laughs just watching those old Johnny Carson shows.
Good,
absolutely.
Good point. And when we come, thank you, Bob. Wonderful call. When we come back, I want to talk with David, and of course, all of you guys listening in and calling in about the straight man, because that's really a big part of all this. And there's so much great stuff. David Misch, the book is called Funny the Book. Go to the website, funnythebook.com. We'll keep David on a little bit. It's early where well, not that early. It's after midnight, isn't it? Is it after midnight? Oh, my gosh, we're keeping up late. We'll continue in just a moment here. We're taking a break from the hard news of the day and doing something that's fun, and we all deserve it. You certainly do. Be right back. And welcome back. Jordan Rich Show, WBZ, WCCO, in the middle of the night or early morning if you prefer. The best time to be alive and well and doing this show, and it's 3:26 Eastern Time. My guest from California is David Misch, M-I-S-C-H. Very important name in the annals of humor. Funnythebook.com. Funny the Book is in my hands. And David, we're going to take a break in about 4 minutes for the bottom hour, and then we'll come back and take all the calls that are left. And there's a bunch of great guys. Let me ask you about the straight man. And that's the key to so many of the great successful partnerships. These are people who know how to be there, to be bounced off of, if I can use that expression.
Absolutely, and the two examples that come to mind, obviously Bud Abbott,
right,
from Abbott and Costello, and you listen to those routines, it's razor-sharp timing, but that timing is just as much Abbott's as it is Costello's.
Right.
And then the other thing that proves the importance of the straight man is Burns and Allen, George Burns and Gracie Allen. So George Burns spent the first 40 years of his career being the straight man for Gracie Allen. She died, and then he became a comedian. He was a brilliant comedian. He had no problem carrying the stage all by himself, but he ceded that position to Gracie because he knew that she was hilarious, and he worked great with her as her setup guy.
And our friend Bob from the North End mentioned Carson and the ability for him as host to allow someone to just work his magic or her magic, and then he would just be there to add a little something. He was brilliant anyway. I mean, that's a great talent.
Thing about Carson,
yeah.
You know, the most famous clip is when this singer named Ed Ames threw a tom. He played the character Tonto in the Lone Ranger on a TV show.
No, actually, he was the other Indian on. He wasn't Tonto. He was.
You're right.
Fess Parker's.
Daniel Boone.
Daniel Boone, right?
Yeah. So anyway, he was demonstrating tomahawk throwing, and he threw it at a cutout of a man, and it went into his groin area.
Right.
If you get the clip on YouTube, it's unbelievably interesting, I think. Watch very carefully what happens after he does it. Everyone's laughing uproariously, but he's also sort of embarrassed that he did this thing, and he starts going towards it to remove the tomahawk, and Carson grabs him almost aggressively, almost violently, stops him in his tracks. Now, I know a bit about comedy, and I can see in Carson's face, he has no idea what he's going to say. He knows just one thing. He's going to say something. He'll come up with it. He lets the laugh ride, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it is, and then he says, I didn't even know you were Jewish. And the audience explodes.
It's
so
just,
he knew his mind was going to come up with something, but he had the patience and the timing to wait for it.
And who better than the greatest of all, Jack Benny, who had the greatest, the famous "I'm thinking it over." But that's what I love about certain comedy in movies, theater, or stage. The less is more. I mean, oh man, Jackie Vernon, you remember him with the trumpet, absolutely. Man? He would just get up there and be very, very low key and do his thing. Or Dangerfield. Oh my God! And
he was not low key.
no. But guys who would give you less.
Yeah.
And then just hit you with a punchline or hit you with a gag. It would just kill me. One more thing real quick. Larry Fine, I call him the glue. The glue. He holds it all together, this guy.
For the Three Stooges, yeah. You know, a lot of people ask me about the new movie, which I was actually very impressed with. I thought the movie had great flaws, but in terms of the Stooges themselves, they did a great job, and they had sequences of slapstick violence which were brilliantly choreographed.
I can't wait. I missed it when it was around. I'm waiting for it to be Netflixed to me, and I can't wait to see it because I'm a huge fan. Stand by, David. One more break here, and then we'll go right to the calls and take us to the top.
Maybe you and Kramer are flying over the Andes.
Why are we flying over the Andes?
We got a soccer game in Chile. Anyway, the plane crashes. Who are you going to eat to survive?
Kramer.
So fast? What about me?
No.
Kramer's so stringy. I'm plump, juicy.
Kramer's got more muscle, higher protein contents, better for you.
Well, I would eat you.
It's very nice, I guess.
I still don't see why you wouldn't eat me. I'm your best friend.
Look, if other people are having some, I'll try you.
Thank you.
Can I have a piece of that?
No.
Hey, welcome back. A little clip from Seinfeld, just one of the many topics, and you can go on forever with David Misch on the line, who spent a little time here in Boston back in the old days, and he's in California. Very successful producer, writer, worked on a lot of successful TV shows and sitcoms, and now Funny, the book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy. And David, we've got so many callers backed up. I just want to go to them, okay?
Sounds good.
Let's start with One-Eyed Jack. That's his name, out in beautiful WCCO, St. Paul, Minneapolis. Hey, Jack.
Hi, Jordan. How are you?
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Good. How you doing, my friend? Say, there you go, Rich and Misch. Now, that sounds like a comedy team, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes.
Say, I'm going to touch base real quick on some really, really old black and white ones.
Okay.
Then I'm going to get off the air. Ernie Kovac.
Oh
yeah.
And I mean, nobody mentioned him, which surprises me, but Soupy Sales, Milton Berle, of course. But I remember Tom Poston. And
I worked with Mr. Poston. He was on Mork and Mindy.
That's right.
Louis Nye, who did his Man on the Street.
Yeah.
And I remember Bob Newhart when he was doing stand-up, and his telephone routine was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
And wasn't he an accountant before he did?
He was. He was an accountant, and then he made his first comedy album, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart, which became a #1 bestseller.
Yeah.
I think almost all the sketches on it were one-sided telephone calls, and that's another example of something that I think still totally works today.
Yep, and then Jackie Gleason, of course. But then I have to say, two that I think probably influenced me more than anybody else is Bill Cosby and Jonathan Winters. And Jonathan Winters, I remember, and I wish I could remember the show, he had a chest, and he opened the chest and he'd pull out hats and gloves and coats and do almost the Robin Williams or Carrot Top type thing.
Well, Robin Williams says, has openly talked about Winters being his idol.
Oh, it's just the most hilarious stuff in the world. I mean, truly. And then, of course, Lucille Ball.
Yeah, let me go back to Winters for 1 second. I was researching him, and there's a clip, if you can find it on YouTube, of him on the Jack Paar show. And Paar wants to test him with this incredible improvisational ability, and he hands him a stick, just a stick. It's like, 8 inches long or something. And Winters does 5 minutes with like 6 or 7 different characters, utterly hilarious stuff.
Oh, man.
That was Jonathan Winters, though.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
And you go back to the Jack Paar days. I mean, Steve Allen in himself was funny.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And I go back to the old black and whites, but that's all I have to say is...
Jack, you said it beautifully.
Well, Louis Nye, so
why
many people
not
forget him. And he was hilarious.
You're right, man.
I really remember he was so dry and so straight.
Indeed.
Yep.
We've got to go, Jack. We've got to go to get everybody else
all
on.
Right. Hey, I wanted to also say one other thing quick, is leave it to you guys to bring some light in a very, very dark time tonight.
Oh, I can thank my guest for that.
And well, you can thank yourself as well.
Okay.
This thing, Aurora is horrible.
Indeed. Thank you, Jack. And in all seriousness, in the midst of all this play, what we're doing is really reflecting on a very important part of our lives that, David, you've done a beautiful job in humorously covering it, but it really does mean as much as anything to be able to laugh, whether it's at somebody else or at yourself. So that's a very good point. And I just want to mention Ernie Kovacs, Jonathan Winters, guys like that are sort of groundbreakers. And then there's like an Andy Kaufman who comes along. People don't even get it, and he's doing shtick that now is considered brilliant. And that time, he was a risk taker. A lot of these guys are risk takers, aren't they?
Oh, all the great ones are. Ernie Kovacs did things that had really never been done on television, certainly. And all the great ones, it's difficult at the beginning. Steve Martin, who I deal with, I devote a chapter to his stand-up act. His comedy came from a course on philosophy that he took in college, and he was struck by the idea of existentialism and the idea that there is no inherent meaning in anything. Meaning is what you bring to things. And he decided to try and put together a stand-up comedy act without jokes. He was going to do things that people would only be able to find funny if they put themselves into the act, if they sort of figured out what was funny about it. He wasn't going to tell them. No one had ever done anything remotely like that, and within 10 years he was a stand-up comedy phenomenon selling out stadiums.
Incredible, and that arrow through the head routine, and now he's out playing his banjo with his southern group. He's doing great.
Another comedian with music.
Bluegrass. Here's Bob in Alston on WBZ Radio, and it's now 3:40. Hi there, Bob.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Dick. Hey, I wanted to ask 2 quick questions. One is about why is it that there is never a laugh track in cartoons, but there always is in comedy shows like that are sitcoms? And the second question is, I know actors can go to school for drama. Are there schools for comedy?
Okay, well, I'll deal with them in order. So the answer to the first one is I don't know. The whole question of laugh tracks has been controversial in comedy writer circles for many years because most comedy writers hated them. We want to get real legitimate laughs. I remember the first time I did a sitcom and went in the room with the laugh track guy, and I felt so evil and dirty. I would say, that deserves more of a laugh. Give me more of a laugh there.
Well,
Have that laugh trail off here. I was ordering wondering what the reactions would be. But those days are now receding. Very few TV shows have actual laugh tracks. Sometimes they use laugh machines to augment what's there, mostly to smooth it out. Because you cut in TV shows, and you notice the cut if the quality of the laughter changed. But for the most part, that's how it's done now. And in many shows, what we call one-camera film show, that are not done in front of live audiences, like The Office and Parks and Recreation, Louie. These are all shot like miniature movies, and there's no audience at all. So finally, TV executives have figured out that people at home will laugh without hearing other people laugh at the same time.
That's great. You know, I know the Flintstones when I was a kid. You're about my age, I think. I graduated.
That's right. They had a laugh track.
They had a laugh track,
They did.
yeah.
You're right.
But I always, when I'm watching some of these shows, I'm thinking, you know, I would be laughing at this even if it didn't have the laugh track. You know, like Seinfeld when they were in the Chinese food place and they couldn't get a seat. Who hasn't been through that? And they just make it so funny.
Who I mentioned before, he was doing MASH, and the first year or two on the air, they had a laugh track, and he hated it, and he fought, and finally, in the third year, they got rid of it and became a number one show.
Right. They had it in the operating room. They would get rid of it, right?
He said, listen, if you force me to, I'll take it the other places, but you can't have a laugh track in the operating room.
Now, the second question, Bob, and we're going to let you listen off the air. Thank you, Bob, because we're running tight. Schools for comedy. It's a great question because actors are always, learning their craft. What about comedians and so forth? Where is that school?
Well, there actually are sort of versions of that, but I'll put in a plug for a local one. Emerson, is sort of known as the College of Comedy. Jay Leno and a lot of other people have come out of there. And they do teach courses on comedy. But, I taught a course on comedy at USC. Wasn't on stand-up per se, but they have them around the country. But that really gets to an even more basic question, which people ask all the time, which is, can you teach comedy? And the answer is not, I think, a simple yes or no. What it is if you have comedy instincts, skilled teachers can help you hone those instincts and make you better, make you funnier, just like experience will make you funnier.
It's really interesting.
But if
I
don't have the chops, nothing can make you.
Do you watch episodes on Showtime with Matt LeBlanc?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think it's brilliant. And by the way, Matt LeBlanc, I never watched Friends. I just never got into it. But this guy is hysterical. He's playing himself in sort of a warped way. And you realize a lot of these people, it's the material too. I mean, that they get.
Absolutely.
But I wanted
to. As good as your material.
I wanted to bring something up because I've always thought this. What makes a sitcom work for me, besides the writing, is funny people. People who, like Seinfeld, everybody looked funny. I mean, Newman and Kramer. You look at some of these modern sitcoms, and a lot of them feature people who are very good looking. Nothing wrong with that. But they're good actors. But are they really funny? And
it's very tricky to generalize because two things pop into my head. The first is John Hamm, who's a dramatic actor and just has been nominated for an Emmy for a comedy guest spot on 30 Rock. The man's utterly hilarious. He hosted Saturday Night Live. He's been great. And I think he uses his incredible good looks and sort of deadpan dramatic attitude to be even funnier. I mean, he underplays, and that's what makes it funnier.
Right.
And then on Police Squad, the show you mentioned earlier that I did many years ago, Leslie Nielsen was a star. And Leslie Nielsen had been a dramatic, romantic leading man for his entire career. And then in his mid-50s, he got a supporting role in this movie Airplane, where he was asked to play comedy by not being funny, to just do it as deadpan as possible. He got huge laughs, and for the last 20 years of his life, he was a comedy star.
Indeed. My guest is David Misch. Let's go to a few more calls. Kevin in Rhode Island. Welcome, Kevin. You're on WBZ and CCO with David Misch.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, David.
Hi, Kev.
Hi there.
To those of us who are fans of great comedy, not to mention high adventure and excellent performances, but loathe the laugh track, the arrival of the old Maverick TV series on DVD recently has been a godsend. It's a really superb show, and one of the wildest episodes of any television show that I've ever seen is the one entitled Pappy, where James Garner doubles as his old Pappy, and it involves an intrigue that that entails the marriage of his old pappy to an 18-year-old girl, and a staged duel where a Shakespearean actor impersonates a doctor and falsely reports the demise of one of the participants in the duel. I mean, it's an incredible episode, especially for its time, which was pre-1960.
And also it was a Western, so it was unusual in that it had a lot of humor. James Garner was very adept at comedy and indeed starred in a few comedy movies. And also because, again, it was underplayed. It wasn't really broad comedy. It was smart, deadpan humor for the most part.
Yeah, you see, you make a good point, Kev and David, about the attractive, handsome guy who should be the matinee idol, and he is, but he's also got that way. I mean, look at Roger Moore as James Bond. I mean, he would wink and nod and have a lot of fun, you could tell. And that rubs off, and that's funny. That's funny stuff, and it works.
Yeah.
As stellar as James Garner his entire acting career was, I really think that was his signature role. I mean, he was just so good as Maverick. They kept trying to revive it years later because of that. And if I could just segue to the Big Bang Theory for a minute, I think I'm one of the few people who, while I like Jim Parsons, I think he's very funny. For me, the funniest guy on the show is Johnny Galecki because he has more normality to him. He's got like a baseline normality. He's constantly trying to cope with all the crazies around him, and you could see the frustration sometimes builds on his face. He does a great take like that. And you were mentioning attractive people who are funny. I think Kaylee Cuoco is an example of someone who is attractive, but she's also very gifted in comedy, not just on that show, but also on 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter.
Oh, that's right, with John Ritter, the late John Ritter.
You know, one of the challenges attractive people have, and of course we attractive people have so many challenges in life, but one of the challenges they have in comedy is that, you know, it's a little bit offensive. Of course, we sort of lust after them, but we're also, you know, for men, attractive women are like, oh, I want that, and for women, they're jealous, and the same for men. And so the actor, the comedic actor doing those roles, has to disarm that inherent tension that comes from real physical attractiveness, and the great ones are able to do that, usually with a little bit of self-deprecation humor.
Right. Kevin, thank you so much. Great call. Appreciate it. Take care, sir. Before we break here, one more break, and then we'll kind of wrap up. I wanted to mention some of my favorites that happen to be from overseas, over across the pond. Ricky Gervais, I can do no wrong in my opinion. I just love everything he's done. The original Office, just absolutely brilliant. Extras, and more recently, Life is Too Short. I mean, and the thing about Ricky Gervais, very much like Larry David, that sense of discomfort, unease. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't feel comfortable laughing at stuff that makes you squirm. I do.
One of the breakthroughs of both David and Gervais is that for years us comedy writers have been berated by the powers that be that you have to make your characters likable. They won't succeed as comedy if they're not likable. Well, who could possibly like the characters Gervais and David play? They're utterly obnoxious people, sometimes unapologetically so, and yet we relate to them, we find them hilarious, and I think likability turns out to have been wildly overrated.
We'll take one more break. David Misch, who's been so kind to stay with us an extra hour. Funny, the book. And it's the website, too, funnythebook.com. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Yes, the Jordan Rich Show. We have a few minutes left, and very few, with David Misch. And David, this has been just great fun and so necessary this particular weekend. I just wanted to wish you the best, first of all, with Funny, the book. I recommend it to anyone on the planet Earth should read this.
But I don't think people in other solar systems should read it.
Well,
Thanks
that's
a lot.
exactly
I
right.
really appreciate that.
You'll have to talk to Mork from Ork, your old buddy. But I wanted to know what else you're working on, because you're obviously a busy guy. You got a lot going on. What any projects we can look for?
Yeah, I'm working on a TV pilot. After all these years, I'm still hanging in there. I got a play that's opening up in the winter about the student protest movement of the 1960s and 70s. But it's a comedy.
Okay.
And let's see, a few other things. Given that I know it's 4:00 for you, but it's almost 1 for me, and I'm an old man. I can barely.
I understand. I just want to mention that there's some wonderful compliments in the back of the book from people in the biz. You're a name dropper. I'll just do it. Jason Alexander, Bill Marks, and also Carl Reiner, man. I've had him on twice. One of the great honors of my life to interview Carl Reiner twice. when you get that kind of kudo, man, you just got to live with it and say it doesn't get much better, huh?
Oh no, it was wonderful. It was great, and it's surprising. For only $50, he wrote me that book, and I thought, he must have more money. Why does he care? But I guess he was in the mood.
Well, he invested in Saran wrap. Anyway, David, thank you very, very much. It's nice to touch base with a guy who used to live here, and I'm glad you're doing so well. I love the book, and obviously our listeners loved it too.
That's terrific. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, man. Be well.
Okay, you too.
All right. Sorry we didn't get to everybody else. There was a lot of activity on the phone lines. But thank you to David Misch, M-I-S-C-H. And please go to funnythebook.com.